coming up.
And when you make a major decision like that to basically defy the government of Canada, does that get discussed at your board?
We don't see a conflict with respect to Stripe.
You have a board member whose godson is the godfather to the finance minister and is the economic advisor to the prime minister. And you are telling me you don't know if you proactively put a compliance measure around this man, given the subject matter that we are talking about today.
Yep. So why on earth, especially if you've got a strategic advisor to the prime minister, why are you not passing along these savings to small businesses?
Well, it appears that carbon tax Carney is on a board of a company that seems to think it's better to rip off Canadians and charge higher fees in Canada than it does in the United States or Europe.
Remind you that the kind of names that might be used sometimes for theatrics in the House, I don't appreciate the committee calling someone carbon tax so on and so forth.
Well, it just rolls off the tongue so easily now.
This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Pursuant to the motion adopted on Thursday, September 19, 2024, the committee is resuming its study on credit card practices and regulations in Canada. To get the ball rolling, Mr. Perkins, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Aaron, thank you, witnesses, for being here at this early start in the morning. My first question is for Mr. Brownlee. Mr. Brownlee, you represent convenience stores, small businesses across the country. We've had testimony. Most people know that these merchant fees range between 1% to 3%. What do your businesses on average pay as a percentage of sales, the merchant fee that charges a percentage of sales?
It varies by store and by banner. It can range anywhere from, well, let's use gas for an example, anywhere from 1 to up to 6 cents, depending on what's going on. And I'll give you an example. Last year, the fees are so high that in Atlantic Canada, where they have regulated margins on fuel, a lot of the retailers out east were offering up to a 7 cent a litre discount if you paid by indirect debit or cash. So the fees are they're pretty astronomical in what we do or what our banners go through on a daily basis. But the reality is, though, is just we are very unique because of the nature of the products we sell. Taxes are layered a lot on fuel, whether in tobacco.
No, I understand that. Sorry, dear, no, my time's limited. So, but the upper end generally is about 3%, right?
It is correct, but it depends also. That doesn't take into consideration some of the premium plans for some of these card holders, because as Mr. Lamprell said in his opening, that basically the points are on the backs of the retailers.
Yeah, I got it. Mr. Peters, Stripe's been very successful. I've read in the Financial Times and other places that you grew by 25% last year overall globally. You just said in Canada, I think it was in Canada, that you grew by 50% in the last 2 years. Is that correct?
Companies on Stripe have seen their payment volume grow by 50%. It's the companies that we support have grown.
But you're fairly successful. It's I know as a private company, some of the stuff's not public. But can you tell me? I understand that last year the global revenue may have been around $14 billion. Can you tell me what the revenue was in Canada for Stripe last year?
We don't confirm or discuss private financials.
So your operating profit margins, none of those things you will disclose publicly. So it's very difficult to understand where other of your competitors are public what your profit margins are. But it's a fairly profitable business because it's an electronic business. You said, and very proud of your growth. So when you make the decision to basically say no to the government on their claim that they're lowering merchant fees, in your management structure, where does that go? Does that go beyond Canada? Does that involve your head office, which I believe is in California?
Our management team is spread around. We do have we're over 100 employees in Canada. We're a distributed
So
workforce.
where's the decision made?
Decisions are made collectively by individuals from a range of offices and locations across North America.
And when you make
around
a major decision like that to basically defy the government of Canada, does that get discussed at your board?
This pricing decision was not discussed at the board level. The board is not involved in this.
The board is not involved. Okay. So I'd like to go back to this issue of the claim that you provide this great flat rate pricing. On your website, your flat rate pricing in Canada is 2.9% plus a 30-cent fee, according to your website. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So 2.9% of the value of the transaction gets charged, right? So as the value of that transaction rises, the value of the revenue, or the amount of revenue the overall system gets, also rises. But the cost doesn't really change on the transaction. It's an electronic transaction. So as you go up, you're making more revenue, which means that your profit margin probably goes up the more expensive the transaction is, correct?
Actually, that's incorrect. When costs go up, we hold that flat rate the same. And like I said, costs have gone up. And this year, costs are net up. The costs fluctuate. Card network costs fluctuate all the time. There are hundreds of different fluctuations.
When it's based on the price of the goods, the amount of money that comes in rises every time on the transaction, right? If I go from a $100 transaction to a $200 transaction, the revenue you get on a $200 transaction in numbers is more than you get on $100.
On a percentage basis, that's true. However, our percentage has remained the same for 8 years.
Well, of course, because as inflation drives costs up and transactions go up, and we've seen massive inflation, you get a massive revenue boost without having to change your prices.
Well, actually, we've held our price the same for 8 years.
No, you've held your percentage the same. Your revenue's not the same. It's growing exponentially because of inflation and because the cost of the basket size that gets charged goes up. It's a false claim to say that you're not making more money. So why is it that when you're making that much more money, are you that much less efficient than your competitors like Moneris and others who have agreed to this price change and you're refusing to do it? Are you that poor a company in your technology that you can't take this modest price cut?
We've held our price the same for 8 years. I can't think of many other products where the prices have stayed the same for 8 years.
Your competitors are lowering the price and dealing with the competitor. So, and you're saying it's because your costs have gone up. Why do your costs go up when theirs aren't?
In my opening remarks, I pointed out two things. Yes, net costs are up, and so the flat rate shields those businesses from what would otherwise be a cost increase. We are also taking a principled position in support of simple pricing. Our concern with the government's announcement...
Taking a principled position in terms of keeping and maintaining the growth in your profit margin and your revenue and not passing it on, where other companies who are your competitors are respecting the fact that, unlike Europe and other places, we charge high fee merchant fees here, and you're unwilling like Moneris, TD Capital, Chase Merchants, Global Payments, you're unwilling to do what they are doing. And you're not the only one. There are other companies that have remained silent. But it's incredible to me that when your revenue goes up as inflation drives the basket up, that you're unwilling to say, you know what, we're making a lot of money here. We're going to participate in making it easier on all the merchants in this country in doing this. I would think, and maybe it's just because, you know, Canada's small for a global company like you guys that are operating around the world, that you don't care about what the government and what taxpayers and what businesses need here, as long as you can keep going at your 2.9%, which is the most expensive, as we've just heard, in the industry, that it's 1% to 3%. You're at the high end of the charging. You got lots of room to cut.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. We're out of time, way over time actually, but MP Area, the floor is yours.
I don't understand the rationale. You say that whatever the government has done, it is a small difference. But why don't you pass on that small, what you call small advantage to the businesses?
Because the announcement of the government, the expectation is effectively that we would have to split our customers into two different groups. They have chosen winners and losers, and the expectation is that we
Mr.
would.
Peters, they have not chosen winners, they have chosen small businesses versus the large businesses. They are saying that the roadside convenience store with the average sales volume of less than 300,000 is different from Walmart's. That's what they have chosen. And secondly, you are a global company. You said that your management team, they are all across the world. What is the interchange fee in Australia or European Union?
Are the specific fee charged by the networks in each region?
Yes, what is the cap imposed by the authorities in European Union or Australia?
Well, both regions have different policies that affect
Okay, what is
interchange
the thing?
costs.
If I say that it is 0.5% in European Union, am I closer to the correct number?
The average interchange in Europe is approximate to that.
Now, why is that is so high in Canada? Why it has to be so high in Canada?
I don't think there's anything that suggests that it has to be so high here either.
Yeah, then, when the government makes some small changes, what you call small changes, the government may disagree. Why are you unwilling to pass on that small changes?
Because it is such a small amount that if you ask a small business whether they would prefer to lose a simple, predictable price or take what in many cases would on average be just...
Listen, I too came from business. I understand a standard pricing is an easy thing to understand. To make a small change is also easy. Again, you can give it for all across the customer base.
Mr. Peters, on your website, Stripe says it wouldn't be passing along the savings from the government's announcement with their deal with Visa and MasterCard to lower fees for small businesses on some pricing models due to, quote, their credit card processing in Canada for businesses on standard pricing increasing by 0.036%, primarily due to the recent introduction of GST, HST taxes for certain network card schemes. Has Stripe ever lobbied the Canadian federal government on this issue?
I have been engaged with the Department of Finance on this, yes. When we first learned that this was under consideration, that there was a negotiation going on, and that it would be effectively a reduction for a subset. What's that?
When did you interact with the government on that?
I have been here in Ottawa multiple times over the past 2 years,
Okay.
so over a period of time.
Did that posture come from any direction from the board?
No, it did not.
Okay. Stripe lobbies the federal government on a wide variety of economic policy, including not limited to taxation policy, correct?
We do engage in a number of areas, particularly areas that would improve competition and overall lower costs in the payment space. Things like open banking, access to the real-time rail.
Sure. Since accepting the role of economic advisor to the Prime Minister, has Stripe required its board member, Mark Carney, to undertake any sort of preventative compliance measure to ensure that it does not run afoul of federal lobbying rules?
I'm not engaged with the board.
Yeah, but you would know, like, is there a preventative compliance measure to ensure that now you have a board member who is directly writing economic policy that ostensibly would benefit Stripe? Is there any preventative compliance measure to ensure that Stripe does not run afoul of federal lobbying rules?
Again, I'm not engaged with the board, but I'll try to answer your question.
It's a simple yes or no, frankly. So you don't know?
I'm not engaged with the board. In this instance, the board was not involved with this decision.
I'll ask a different question. Prior to Mr. Carney accepting the role of economic advisor to the Prime Minister, did Stripe contact the Federal Lobbying Commissioner to proactively ensure compliance with federal lobbying rules?
I want to make sure that I'm precise on that, so if it's okay, may I please follow up with you?
Certainly. So you'll be tabling that with the committee?
I will follow up and work to follow up in the best way possible.
You will table with the committee. You're not going to be backdooring me on this. You will table that with the committee, yeah?
So, I'm afraid I'm not sure what that technically means. Does that?
Well,
it
means.
That?
So, do you realize that not complying with the Lobbying Act can be a criminal matter that is taken up with the RCMP?
Again, I'll follow up and table it with the committee. I want to make sure that we're precise on that.
Has the board ever discussed in Mr. Carney's attendance the impact of any sort of federal economic policy, including but not limited to taxation policy, on Stripe?
If you're asking whether the board has engaged in public policy advocacy in Canada.
No, I'm asking whether the board has ever discussed the impact of Canadian federal economic policy, including but not limited to taxation policy, on Stripe while Mr. Carney was on the board.
No, not to my knowledge. I'm responsible for public policy, and I'm not aware of any engagement by any member of our
We will be putting forward a
board.
production order for this type of information, by the way.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
So is Stripe not concerned about the optics of one of its board members making economic policy for the federal government without any sort of guardrail or proactive compliance measure to ensure that it doesn't run afoul of federal lobbying rules?
Like I said, I'm not engaged with the board, and in this instance, the board was not involved in the decision at question here in the hearing today.
So the board would
and-
never have discussed the impact, you've got it right on your website, that the reason why you're not passing these savings along to small businesses is because of federal taxation policy. So ostensibly, that has an impact on business operations. So just to be clear, and on the record, you are saying that the board never discussed this type of taxation policy or any sort of federal economic policies, its impact on Stripe's operation.
To my knowledge, the board and no member of the board has engaged on behalf of Stripe on a
No,
public
but I'm
policy
asking if they
matter.
discussed it, not if they lobbied, because here's the optics, right? You have a member of your board who has a direct line to the finance minister and the prime minister, and now you are a beneficiary of a federal government policy. They didn't include any sort of, caveat saying that you have to pass this savings along to small businesses. Don't you think that looks a little sus?
The board was not engaged in this decision. We don't see a conflict with respect to Stripe.
You have a board member whose godson is the godfather to the finance minister and is the economic advisor to the prime minister. And you are telling me you don't know if you proactively put a compliance measure around this man, given the subject matter that we are talking about today.
Yep.
You're asking me about board procedure. I'm not engaged with the board. I wish I could tell you more clearly.
Thank you, Madam Rempel-Garner, and I understand Mr. Peters is committed to table the information to the committee, so that would be through the clerk. Thank you. We'll now turn it over to MP Gahir.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for appearing before the committee. My questions are largely for Interact, Mr. Bosan. Did I pronounce that right?
Yes.
Yes. So I find that an increasing number of businesses in my riding and wherever I go are increasing Interact, are accepting Interact e-transfer as a method of payment. Do you have the data around what percentage of your total payments involve a business?
So we do, and thank you for the question, we do examine the numbers of e-transfers sent by the business. I don't have that right in front of me, but we can follow up with that information on numbers sent by a business.
So I'm reading articles online where that percentage has gone up over the years. Would you say that's correct, that an increasing number of businesses are accepting Interact e-transfer as a method of payment?
Yes, in line with the growth of e-transfer, which is, I guess, at about 1.2 billion transactions, an increasing share of that percentage has been made up by businesses.
Okay. And then what fees are involved for a business when they accept a payment through Interact e-transfer?
So it's important to be clear on the Interact e-transfer service. Interact provides the service to our customers, in this case the financial institutions. Those financial institutions are then responsible for determining pricing to their customers, whether those be businesses or consumers. Interact does not have a role in setting those fees. Our responsibility is to operate the network.
Mr. Peters, do you have any aspirations to be a board member yourself one day?
Sure.
Okay. What would be the board salaries that people would get on the board for Stripe?
I do not know.
Do they get stock options?
I do not know how their compensation is set.
Bonuses? Are there bonuses that are paid out? Do you know?
I don't know, but I would surmise that they're not. It's not performance-based.
It's not performance-based. Interesting. Okay. So any shares in the company or anything like that? Is that part of it at all?
I actually do not know how the compensation is set.
Okay. So, I mean, you'd want to be a board member one day, but you don't actually even know what the compensation would be of it. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I've served on boards of nonprofits. It's as most boards provide a strategic and advice role to leadership of the organizations they're a part of. That is, I think, worthwhile work.
Okay. I'm a little bit concerned here because basically you've come here today and just said that you're okay with ripping off Canadians. 2.9% is the fee here. What's the fee in the United States?
Comparable.
But it's not the same.
I believe it's 15 bips less, but I'll confirm that.
2.7%? Is that what it is? What's your website says? 2.7%, right?
It's on our website.
Okay, per transaction in Canada is 30 cents. In the U.S., what is in the U.S. per transaction?
Per transaction cost?
Yeah.
I don't have that information at hand today, I'm sorry.
Okay, and then the extra fee, what would the extra fee be?
I believe it's 30 cents.
I think it's 30 cents in Canada, but in the United States.
Off the top of my head, I actually forget at the moment.
Well, you came from Washington. You live in the United States. You think you don't know it, that in the U.S. it is? On the website, it's 5 cents. Okay? So why are you ripping off Canadians?
We did pass through the reduction. And for our users on flat rate pricing, we're shielding them from what would otherwise be a cost increase. And we haven't raised our prices in over 8 years.
Okay, what percentage on volume is a decrease then? If you said you've passed on a decrease, what percentage is that then on volume? What is that percentage?
For businesses on interchange plus pricing, it's just passed through, the amount of reduction they get is exactly what the card networks agreed to provide.
Earlier today, you said that it was such a small change what the government was working with for you on that you weren't going to pass it along. Yet we see what this has done for we look at your revenue, the way it's just skyrocketed over time. I can tell you that a small difference is big, and I'm just going to use my own quick little story here. Many years ago, I worked construction, making $14 an hour. I got a 50-cent pay raise. That was a lot of money for me, even though it was only 50 cents an hour. A small difference, a small amount makes a big difference for people and for companies in particular. Small businesses that are trying to get by here, they're looking to maybe expand their operations. That small number is a huge difference. So why on earth, especially if you've got a strategic advisor to the Prime Minister, why are you not passing along these savings to small businesses?
Well, I understand what you're saying, that a small amount can make a difference. In this case, you have to think about it in context of the many other things that a small business would care about. They care about increasing their sales. They care about having things work really well and being simple. And what we should be doing is considering it from their perspective. What are all of these things relative to one another? And we thought long and hard about this, and we looked at the small reduction relative to what they might lose, which is simple, clear pricing, and we felt like that was not a good trade-off. There are ways to make this more workable, and had we been involved in this negotiation, if it wasn't just a small set of parties.
But you are part of the negotiation, because at the end of the day, you have the strategic advisor to the Prime Minister on your board. You are involved in negotiations here. So quickly, what percentage of volume of transactions are on interchange plus pricing versus standard pricing in Canada?
We really were not involved in this negotiation. We found out about it just like the other witness in the news.
Yeah, Mark Carney's been on the board for over 2 months, though. This guy is part of the negotiations with the government. He's like, this guy is directly involved here. Like,
with respect, the board is not involved in this, and no board member, to my knowledge, has been involved in public policy advocacy in Canada.
So you're confident telling this committee that Mark Carney is not involved in putting any lobbying or any strategic advice or public policy advice to the government of Canada?
I am confident that no, not to my knowledge, any board member has been involved in public policy advocacy in Canada.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patzer and Mr. Peters. I'll now turn it over to MP Area.
I am not in favor, generally speaking, I am not in favor like taking the Australian route and saying that, interchange fee, let's fix it at 0.35%. I believe that is what the Australian fees is, or maybe 0.5% as the European Union is charging. But what is that you can tell us that can help us understand much better?
Well, we like to compete on the value of our product, and I mentioned earlier that there are 50 different processors in the market. there are different business models serving different parts of the economy. Our model, yes, it involves executing a transaction, processing a transaction, but there are a lot of other value-added services. So when you look at the way we're helping businesses succeed, it has a lot to do with those additional services that go beyond a very plain vanilla execution of a transaction. And
I'm not disrespectful, but just listen, go back and listen to what you said. Tell me what is that we can get out of what you have just said that we can use it in our policy making process. Nothing. Policy making, most of it is data driven. And if we don't know what the actual information is, how can we change our policies?
We posted on our website very specific, detailed information, which I believe, unlike any other company, is highly specific. We've tried to be very transparent.
Okay. Specific. What is your volumes in Canada, and what percentage of your revenue, overall revenue, comes from your standard pricing? Very specific. What percentage comes from the interchange fee plus? Can we get those specifics?
Well, again, my expectation of the hearing was that we would be discussing what these numbers mean for small businesses, our revenue, and the way our business model works as a company to us. I think that doesn't seem to me to matter as much to a small business.
One of the reasons why we want to discuss with you is that you refuse to pass on the changes that the government has brought in.
We did pass them through. We did pass them through.
Yeah.
We did pass through the reduction.
So you have implemented everything the government of Canada is suggesting, and you are not disagreeing with whatever they're saying.
We did pass through the reduction. For our flat rate customers, we're shielding them from what would otherwise be an increase. The government's announcement, the expectation, is effectively to say there are some small businesses and other small businesses, and we're going to treat them differently. And that is inherently in conflict with a flat rate pricing model that treats the whole class of businesses with the same price. So we could split it up, and then if there's another expectation in the future, then we're splitting it up again. And then what about other cost increases? We would be moving from a world where many small businesses, particularly small businesses over larger businesses who value that simple price, would suddenly lose that, and they would be cast into a fluctuating world of interchange plus pricing that is very technically difficult to manage.
If I may, you guys must be profitable in Australia, European Union. I'm sure you are extremely profitable in Canada. Why is that, what if we bring in the same sort of model that European Union or Australia has got in capping the overall interchange fee?
We are successful around the world. We're helping businesses grow around the world despite different regulatory environments. I would be happy to engage with you on what the right way to do it, but I can tell you this announcement, this expectation, it's not workable. I'm very open to that conversation because we do operate around the world and we do figure out how to make it work.
I have served on board of an international retailer. I've served on board of financial institution, and I've served on the executive teams in those large organizations as well. So I know the role of a board, and the role of a board is not advisory. The role of the board is governance and final decision-making process. It is not advisory. So they are involved in the big decisions and approving or rejecting the big decisions of management on things. So it would be shocking to me that the Stripe board, which includes Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of Canada and financial economic advisor to the Prime Minister of Canada, would make a decision about not complying with the government of Canada without a board discussion. So you're telling me you're not aware that that's happened?
We are complying with every obligation we have. We're talking about an expectation in this case. We have met that expectation by passing through the reduction. The decisions in this regard were management-level decisions. The board was not involved.
So when you're on a board, the compensation is pay. The compensation is shares, options, director share units, a whole bunch of share-based equity things. In fact, it's a requirement for that. Are you aware, MP Rempel-Garner asked you this, I think, or MP Patzer did, are you aware of what any of those compensation packages are?
I'm afraid not.
Well, I think perhaps it would be helpful, since you're based in Washington and you're dealing with that lobbying too, for you and for this committee to know it is. So I will ask you to please table the board compensation packages by director with this committee, please. So I'll move on to my next question. So Mr. Pastor touched on this, and you have pricing, you like this fixed pricing, but it's not fixed globally. It's different pricing in different countries, and the pricing seems to be quite high here compared to the United States. So Mark Carney sits on your board. You derive probably a huge amount of your revenue, although we don't know that, from the United States. And you offer a significantly lower rate in the United States, both on the percentage fee, 2.7% versus 2.9% in Canada, and on the fixed transaction fee of 5 cents versus 30. That's quite a difference. Has Mark Carney ever suggested to Stripe's management that you shouldn't charge more in Canada than the United States?
Well, the fact that our price is different in different jurisdictions reflects a number of matters. It reflects there might be a different regulatory environment. The actual network cost might be lower. And in many of the markets that you're mentioning, like I said earlier in my opening remarks, 80 to 90% of the fees that we charge go to the issuing bank. Much of that is out of our control. So I wouldn't want you to think that our pricing is just what we say it is in any given market because we deem it to be that. It's
0.5% in Europe because that's legislated. It's 2.9% in Canada. It's 2.7% in the U.S. It appears that Carbon Tax Carney is on a board of a company that seems to think it's better to rip off Canadians and charge higher fees in Canada than it does in the United States or Europe. But I am on limited time, and because we haven't been able to get many of the answers that we've been seeking, I'm going to move the following motion.
And Mr. Perkins, I'll let you move your motion, but I'll just remind you that the kind of names that might be used sometimes for theatrics in the House, I don't appreciate the committee calling someone carbon tax, so on and so forth, is not something I entertain. I want to entertain at this committee, so please be mindful of that in the future. And now I'll let you move your motion.
Well, it just rolls off the tongue so easily now. So I'll move the following motion if I could. I'm sure there are. I'd like to move the following motion, that given Stripe's unknown profit margins and its refusal to comply with the government's interchange fee reduction plan, the committee order the production of all Stripe board meeting minutes related to the Government of Canada's announcement to reduce credit card fees, balance sheets, cash flow statements, and income statements since March 2021, broken down by Canada and Stripe's global operations.
Okay, so I believe, so the motion is pertinent to the study that we are studying right now. So I understand the clerk will circulate it. It's already done. Thank you, Madam Clerk.